February 11th, 1968, 0347. Airspace over Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam. At 30,000 feet, where the air is thin and cold as a blade, 3 Boeing B-52 Stratofortress bombers from the 28th Bombardment Squadron maintain strict formation. Below them, hidden by clouds and pre-dawn darkness, lay the besieged Marine base at Khe Sanh, a tiny American outpost encircled by 2 North Vietnamese divisions, more than 20,000 soldiers supported by Soviet artillery and tanks, tightening their grip. The bomber crews could not see their target. They flew by coordinates transmitted from the ground, trusting the mathematics of their navigation systems. In 8 minutes, each aircraft would release 108 750-pound bombs, 324 bombs total, 243 tons of explosives that would blanket a strip of jungle 1.5 kilometers long by 0.5 kilometer wide. The commander of the North Vietnamese 304th Regiment did not know what was coming. His assault battalions, dug in just 200 meters from the American perimeter, were preparing for the decisive attack. Soviet advisors were helping coordinate the artillery preparation. S-75 surface-to-air missile batteries deployed to the north covered the airspace. Everything was proceeding according to General Giap's plan, to repeat the triumph of Dien Bien Phu. In moments, the earth beneath them would transform into hell. This was an arc-light strike, an operation that transformed strategic bombers into instruments of tactical terror. An operation whose name would become synonymous with absolute destructive power and the cold, merciless mathematics of modern warfare. The survival of the 6,000 Marines at Khe Sanh depended not merely on their courage, their fortifications, or their rifles. It depended on a mathematical reality inaccessible to their enemy. A global system of aerial annihilation that could deliver more explosive force in a single mission than entire World War II. 2 bombing campaigns, guided by navigation technology that made the invisible visible, the unreachable reachable. The Boeing B-52 Stratofortress was never designed for what it would do in Vietnam. Conceived in the early 1950s as a high-altitude strategic bomber to deliver nuclear weapons against Soviet cities, the 8-engine giant was engineered for apocalypse. Its operational ceiling exceeded 50,000 feet. Its range spanned continents. Each aircraft could carry up to 60,000 pounds of ordnance. 30 tons of death distributed across 108 individual bombs or larger configurations of 2,000-pound munitions. When Operation Arc Light commenced on June 18, 1965, military planners transformed strategic doctrine into tactical reality. The B-52, carrier of civilization-ending weapons, became a precision instrument of battlefield destruction. The first mission dispatched 27 bombers from Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, a 2,500-mile flight, to strike a Viet Cong staging area northwest of Saigon. The results proved immediate and devastating. Intelligence later confirmed that the target area, previously hosting an estimated battalion-strength enemy force, had been obliterated. Survivors reported that men simply vanished, not killed by identifiable wounds, but erased by overpressure, buried alive by collapsing tunnel systems, or driven insane by the psychological trauma of invisible death from an invisible enemy. The mathematics of arc light were brutal and precise. A standard 3-plane cell, flying in formation with bombs released in sequence, could saturate a target box measuring approximately 1.5 kilometers by 0.5 kilometers, what planners termed a pattern. Within that pattern, every square meter received coverage. There was no evasion, there was no defense. Soldiers in the open were shredded by shrapnel, traveling at supersonic velocities. Soldiers in bunkers were crushed when the earth itself liquefied under the concussive force. Soldiers in tunnels suffocated as blast waves consumed all available oxygen, leaving only carbon monoxide and death. By late 1967, Arc Light missions averaged 800 sorties per month. Each sortie represented not a single aircraft, but a cell of 3 B-52s, each carrying maximum ordnance loads. The cumulative tonnage exceeded 70,000 tons per month, more explosives than the entire Allied strategic bombing campaign dropped on Germany in any single month of World War II. The system operated with industrial efficiency. Bombers launched from Guam, U Tapao, Royal Thai Navy Airfield in Thailand, and later from bases in Okinawa, maintaining a continuous rotation that ensured no 12-hour period passed without B-52s over Vietnam. The North Vietnamese Army and their Soviet advisors understood the implications immediately. Traditional defensive doctrine, dispersion, concealment, fortification, proved useless against an enemy that could not be seen, heard, or engaged. Radar systems detected the bombers too late or not at all. B-52s, flying at 30,000 feet, remained below the effective acquisition range of most ground-based radars until bombs were already falling. Anti-aircraft artillery could not reach them. Fighters could not intercept them in time. The Arc Light strike became the ultimate expression of technological asymmetry, an enemy that existed beyond the physical and perceptual reach of opposing forces, yet delivered destruction with biblical totality. Senior Lieutenant Nguyen Van Mo, a battalion commander in the 95C Regiment, later testified about his experience during an Arc Light strike in November 1967. His unit, positioned in carefully prepared bunkers near the Cambodian border, received no warning. The first indication of attack came when the earth erupted. He reported that the concussion killed half his command staff instantly. Not from fragmentation, but from the pressure wave alone, which ruptured internal organs and induced fatal brain hemorrhaging. Those who survived the initial explosions emerged to find their entire defensive position transformed into a lunar landscape of overlapping craters, each 10 to 15 meters in diameter and 5 meters deep. Of his battalion's original strength of 420 men, 340 were casualties. 70% dead, 11% permanently incapacitated, the remainder in shock. This was not warfare as practiced by previous generations. This was industrial-scale annihilation delivered with the punctuality of a railroad schedule and the reliability of a factory production line. The Americans had taken the most powerful weapon system in human history and made it routine. The North Vietnamese did not face the American air campaign alone. From the earliest stages of Arc Light operations, the Soviet Union recognized that allowing unrestricted American aerial dominance would doom their Southeast Asian ally. Moscow responded with one of the most sophisticated air defense systems ever deployed in combat, the S-75 Divina surface-to-air missile system, known to NATO as the SA-2 guideline. The S-75 represented a technological leap in air defense. First deployed in 1957, the system utilized semi-active radar homing to engage aircraft at altitudes up to 60,000 feet and ranges exceeding 30 kilometers. Each missile carried a 195-kilogram high-explosive fragmentation warhead with a proximity fuse designed to detonate within lethal radius of the target, even without direct impact. The system's engagement radar, the SNR-75 Fan Song, could track multiple targets simultaneously and guide up to 3 missiles in flight. Soviet military advisors began deploying S-75 batteries to North Vietnam in April 1965. By July, the first operational sites were active around Hanoi and Haiphong. By late 1965, North Vietnam operated approximately 25 S-75 battalions, each with 6 launchers, supported by Soviet radar operators, fire control technicians, and tactical advisors. The system's impact proved immediate. On July 24, 1965, an S-75 battery shot down an F-4C Phantom II, the first American aircraft lost to a surface-to-air missile in Southeast Asia. It would not be the last. The strategic implications for arc light operations were severe. While B-52s primarily struck targets in South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, areas where SS-75 coverage remained limited, the aircraft regularly transited airspace within range of North Vietnamese missile sites. More critically, as the air campaign expanded and targets shifted northward, planners recognized that B-52s might eventually need to strike heavily defended areas. The aircraft's radar cross-section, though smaller than many bombers due to its high-altitude design, remained detectable at long ranges. Its cruise speed of 500 miles per hour left little margin for evasive maneuvering. A B-52 could not outrun, outturn, or outclimb an S-75. If engaged, the bomber's only defenses were electronic countermeasures and altitude. The U.S. Air Force responded with a comprehensive suppression of enemy air defenses, SEAD, campaign. The effort combined multiple approaches: physical destruction of missile sites, electronic jamming of guidance radars, and tactical deception to exhaust missile inventories. Physical destruction missions, codenamed Iron Hand, utilized F-105 Thunder Chief and later F-4 Phantom II aircraft equipped with AGM-45 Shrike anti-radiation missiles. The Shrike homed on emissions from Fan Song radars. Following the radar beam directly to its source, the missile's 145-pound warhead could destroy or disable radar vans, forcing battery crews to shut down their systems or risk annihilation. Iron Hand flights accompanied bomber strikes, loitering near known S-75 sites. When radars activated to engage the bombers, Iron Hand aircraft fired Shrikes, forcing the defenders to choose: maintain radar lock and die, or shut down and allow the bombers through. The North Vietnamese and their Soviet advisors adapted quickly. S-75 batteries adopted shoot and scoot tactics, activating radars for minimal periods, launching missiles, then immediately displacing to alternate positions. Dummy sites with inactive radars drew American attacks, while real batteries remained concealed. Optical tracking methods allowed limited engagement without radar emissions. The air defense network became a lethal chess match. American electronic warfare officers analyzing radar patterns, Soviet advisors developing counter-tactics, both sides measuring success in aircraft destroyed or missiles expended. Electronic warfare aircraft proved essential to B-52 survival. The EB-66 destroyer, a modified tactical bomber, carried powerful jamming equipment capable of disrupting S-75 guidance radars. EB-66s flew escort missions, positioning themselves between B-52 formations and known missile sites, flooding the electromagnetic spectrum with noise that obscured bomber positions. Later, EC-121 Warning Star aircraft provided airborne early warning, detecting missile launches and transmitting warnings to bomber crews. The B-52 itself received continuous electronic upgrades. The D model featured the ALT-28 radar jammer and ALQ-117 deception system, which generated false targets to confuse tracking radars. The upgraded ALQ-155 countermeasures system, introduced in 1967, provided comprehensive protection across multiple radar frequencies. Chaff dispensers released clouds of aluminum strips that created false radar returns, obscuring the bomber's actual position. Despite these measures, the S-75 remained a lethal threat. The system achieved its most devastating success during Operation Linebacker II in December 1972, when B-52 raids targeted Hanoi and Haiphong directly. Over 11 days, North Vietnamese S-75 batteries shot down 15 B-52s, losses that shocked the American public and military leadership alike. The 129 crew members killed or captured represented the highest B-52 casualties of the entire war. Post-war analysis revealed that Soviet advisors had directed the air defense effort personally, employing coordinated salvo firings that overwhelmed electronic countermeasures through sheer volume. Some sites launched 6 missiles simultaneously, ensuring at least one penetrated the jamming. Yet, even at Linebacker 2's peak intensity, the loss rate remained under 2%. 15 aircraft lost out of 729 sorties flown. The vast majority of B-52s penetrated the most heavily defended airspace in history, delivered their ordnance on target, and returned safely. The campaign achieved its military objective. By December 29th, North Vietnam's strategic air defenses had been depleted, industrial targets destroyed, and Hanoi forced to return to negotiations. The B-52, even facing Soviet technology and advisors, had proven itself survivable and effective. Soviet military analysts later acknowledged the effectiveness of American seed tactics and electronic warfare. A classified 1974 report from the Soviet General Staff noted that while the S-75 had inflicted significant losses, the system had failed to prevent the American air campaign from achieving its objectives. The report recommended substantial upgrades to Soviet air defense doctrine, including improved mobility, better electronic countermeasures, and integration of multiple systems to create overlapping kill zones. The transformation of the B-52 from strategic nuclear platform to tactical bombardment tool represented one of the most significant adaptations in military aviation history. It required not merely adjusting tactics, but reconceptualizing the fundamental purpose of strategic air power. In 1964, as American ground forces prepared for large-scale deployment to Southeast Asia, senior Air Force planners confronted an uncomfortable reality. The most expensive, most capable bomber force ever constructed had no clear role in a limited war against an insurgent enemy possessing no industrial infrastructure, no cities worth targeting, and no fixed military installations of strategic value. The Viet Cong operated from villages, jungle camps, and tunnel complexes. The North Vietnamese army concentrated forces temporarily, then dispersed before conventional airstrikes could be coordinated. Traditional strategic bombing doctrine, predicated on destroying an enemy's capacity to wage war by eliminating factories, transportation hubs, and urban centers, had no application. General Curtis LeMay, Air Force Chief of Staff and architect of the World War II firebombing campaign against Japan, advocated for massive strategic strikes against North Vietnam itself, targeting Hanoi, Haiphong, industrial sites, and port facilities to cripple the enemy's ability to sustain operations in the South. Political constraints rendered this approach impossible. President Lyndon Johnson's administration, fearful of Chinese or Soviet intervention, imposed strict limitations on targeting, particularly in the North. The Air Force needed a new mission for its premier asset. The solution emerged from operational testing conducted in 1964. If B-52s could not strike strategic targets in North Vietnam, they could serve as flying artillery batteries against tactical targets in South Vietnam and Laos. The aircraft's payload capacity, range, and operational altitude made it uniquely suited for saturation bombing of area targets, precisely the kind of attacks most effective against dispersed enemy forces in jungle terrain. Operation Arc Light officially commenced on June 18, 1965. The inaugural mission launched 27 B-52Fs from Andersen Air Force Base, Guam. Each aircraft carried 51 750-pound M117 bombs and 24 500-pound Mk-82 bombs, a total payload of approximately 27,000 pounds per aircraft. The target? Suspected Viet Cong base camps in the Ben Cat area, northwest of Saigon. Two aircraft collided during mid-air refueling over the South China Sea, killing 8 crew members, a tragic reminder that even routine operations at this scale involved lethal risk. The remaining 25 bombers completed the mission, delivering approximately 675,000 pounds of high explosives onto a target area, measuring roughly 3 square kilometers. Post-strike reconnaissance revealed total devastation. The jungle had been stripped of vegetation. Craters overlapped in patterns suggesting no square meter had escaped coverage. Intelligence reports later confirmed that the Viet Cong 271st Regiment, estimated at 200 personnel, had occupied positions within the target box. After the raid, radio intercepts indicated the unit had ceased to function as a coherent military formation. Subsequent ground sweeps found body parts, destroyed equipment, and collapsed tunnel entrances, but few intact remains. The overpressure from hundreds of simultaneous explosions had literally pulverized human tissue. The tactical effectiveness exceeded all projections. Within weeks, arc light missions expanded from experimental operations to standard doctrine. By December 1965, B-52s were flying 300 sorties per month. By mid-1966, the sortie rate exceeded 600 monthly. At the peak of operations in 1967 to 1968, Strategic Air Command, SAC, maintained a sustained tempo of about 800 sorties per month, 60 per day, an average of 1 3-plane cell striking every 72 minutes, 24 hours a day, every day. The logistics required to sustain this operational tempo defied conventional military planning. Each B-52 consumed approximately 47,000 gallons of jet fuel per mission from Guam, a round trip exceeding 12 hours, including aerial refueling. Tanker aircraft from the Strategic Air Command's Khe Sanh 135 stratotanker fleet flew coordinated refueling tracks, transferring fuel mid-flight over the Pacific and Southeast Asia. A single arc light mission from Guam required 6 to 8 tanker sorties to support 3 bombers. The system demanded perfect coordination. Navigation, timing, fuel transfer rates, and target coordinates all had to align within margins of error measured in seconds and meters. Bomb loading represented another logistical challenge of staggering proportions. Ground crews at Anderson worked 12-hour shifts loading ordnance onto aircraft in continuous rotation. Each 750-pound bomb required mechanical handling equipment. Each aircraft needed 108 weapons loaded into internal bays and external pylons, a process taking 4 to 6 hours per aircraft. Quality control demanded meticulous inspection. A single improperly secured weapon could jam bay doors, abort the mission, or worse, detonate prematurely. Munitions arrived by cargo ship from ammunition depots in the continental United States, a supply chain spanning 7,000 nautical miles and requiring constant replenishment. At peak operations, Anderson Air Force Base stored over 50,000 tons of ordnance, more than many entire nations possessed in their arsenals. The introduction of the B-52D model in 1966 significantly enhanced arc light capabilities. Modified specifically for conventional bombing, the D model featured enlarged bomb bays capable of carrying 84 500-pound bombs internally, plus 24 additional weapons on external racks, a total payload of 54,000 pounds, nearly double the earlier F model's capacity. This modification transformed each aircraft into a weapon of exponentially greater destructive power. A 3-plane D model cell delivered 162 tons of ordnance per mission, enough explosive force to devastate an area of 2 square kilometers. Navigation technology proved equally critical. Early arc light missions relied on radar navigation and celestial positioning, Methods accurate to within several hundred meters. Sufficient for area targets, but inadequate for strikes near friendly positions. The introduction of the Combat Sky Spot ground-directed bombing system in late 1965 revolutionized precision. Ground-based radar operators tracked incoming bombers, calculated precise release points accounting for wind, altitude, and aircraft speed, then transmitted bomb release commands via radio. This system achieved accuracy within 200 meters, close enough to strike enemy positions dangerously near American defensive perimeters. The Battle of Khe Sanh would prove the ultimate test of this system. Between January 21st and April 8, 1968, B-52s flew 2,548 sorties in direct support of the besieged Marine garrison, an average of 31 sorties per day for 77 consecutive days. They delivered 59,142 tons of ordnance within a 5-kilometer radius of the base perimeter. Some strikes landed within 1,000 meters of Marine positions, distances at which artillery crews would consider their own guns dangerously close. The Marines reported that the ground shook continuously, that the explosions were so frequent they became ambient noise, that the psychological effect on enemy forces proved as devastating as the physical destruction. The siege of Khe Sanh represents the most concentrated application of B-52 firepower in military history. Between January 21st and April 8th, 1968, arc light strikes transformed a remote Marine outpost into the testing ground for a radical hypothesis. That air power alone, properly applied, could break a conventional ground siege without requiring relief forces to engage the besiegers directly. Khe Sanh Combat Base occupied a plateau in northwestern Quang Tri Province, 15 kilometers from the Laotian border and less than 20 kilometers south of the DMZ. Strategically, the base served as a forward position to monitor North Vietnamese infiltration routes, particularly Route 9 and the Ho Chi Minh Trail network. Tactically, it represented an isolated liability. A garrison of approximately 6,000 Marines, ARVN Rangers, and indigenous forces, accessible only by air, surrounded by mountainous jungle terrain, ideal for concealment and ambush. In late 1967, intelligence detected the 304th and 325th NVA divisions massing near Khe Sanh. Photo reconnaissance revealed trench systems, artillery positions, and supply caches. Prisoner interrogations confirmed that General Von Nguyen Giap personally directed the operation. The North Vietnamese objective appeared clear: replicate Dien Bien Phu, the 1954 siege in which Viet Minh forces overran a French garrison and shattered France's will to continue the war. Giap intended Khe Sanh to serve the same symbolic and psychological function, demonstrating that American military power could be isolated and destroyed. The siege began on January 21, 1968, with a massive artillery barrage. Soviet-supplied 130mm field guns, positioned in Laotian territory beyond American ground forces' reach, pounded the base with methodical precision. Rocket artillery supplemented the guns. Marines huddled in bunkers as shells detonated continuously. The ammunition dump exploded, destroying 2,500 tons of munitions. Casualties mounted. Air supply became the only lifeline. C-130 and C-123 transport aircraft running gauntlets of anti-aircraft fire to deliver ammunition, food, medical supplies, and replacements. General William Westmoreland, commander of Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV, recognized that Khe Sanh presented both a crisis and an opportunity. If the base fell, the political and psychological consequences would prove catastrophic, particularly with the Tet Offensive launched simultaneously, already straining American public confidence. But if Khe Sanh held, sustained entirely by air power, It would validate the emerging doctrine of aerial siege breaking. Westmoreland initiated Operation Niagara, a comprehensive air campaign designed to annihilate North Vietnamese forces through sustained bombardment. Niagara integrated tactical fighters, helicopter gunships, artillery, and, most critically, B-52 arc light strikes. The operation represented the most intensive aerial effort of the war. At peak intensity, aircraft delivered ordnance on targets around Khe Sanh every 5 minutes, 24 hours, daily. The B-52 component dwarfed all other elements. Between January 21st and April 8th, Strategic Air Command flew 2,548 arc light sorties targeting positions within 5 kilometers of the marine perimeter. The sorties delivered 59,542 tons of ordnance, approximately 704 tons per day, every day, for 11 weeks. To contextualize this figure, the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima yielded approximately 15 kilotons of explosive force, equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. Over the course of Niagara, B-52s delivered conventional explosive tonnage equal to 4 Hiroshima bombs, concentrated into a tactical area of less than 80 square kilometers. Target selection relied on continuous intelligence updates. Electronic sensors, acoustic detectors, seismic monitors, planted around the base detected troop movements, vehicle traffic, and artillery fire. Forward air controllers in light observation aircraft spotted enemy positions. Signals intelligence intercepted NVA radio communications. All data flowed to the Fire Support Coordination Center at Khe Sanh, where analysts synthesized information and designated arc light target boxes. The system operated with industrial efficiency. Intelligence identified a target, coordinates transmitted to YSAC headquarters. Bombers launched within hours, ordnance delivered with metronomic regularity. The North Vietnamese experienced arc light as apocalyptic. The strikes arrived without warning. No engine noise, no visual indication. The first sign of attack came when the jungle exploded. Lieutenant Hoang Phuong, an artillery officer with the 304th Division, later described the effect. He reported that his battery, positioned in carefully camouflaged revetments, simply ceased to exist during an arc light strike on February 25th. One moment his gun crews were preparing for a fire mission. The next, the earth erupted. The overpressure killed everyone instantly. When survivors from adjacent units reached the position, they found overlapping craters where the battery had been. No intact bodies. No recognizable equipment, just churned earth and fragments. Psychological impact compounded physical destruction. NVA soldiers lived in constant terror of invisible death from the sky. They could not hear the bombers, they could not see them, they could not predict when strikes would come. Men developed acute anxiety disorders, unable to sleep or eat, jumping at every distant sound. Unit cohesion deteriorated as soldiers sought any form of shelter, caves, tunnels, trenches, even when orders demanded they remain in attack positions. Desertion rates spiked. The most devastating strikes landed on suspected staging areas and approach routes. On February 23rd, intelligence indicated that the 304th Regiment was massing for a final assault on the southwestern sector of the perimeter. 24 B-52s, 8 3-plane cells, struck the assembly area in sequence over 90 minutes. The bombing obliterated approximately 3 square kilometers of jungle. Post-strike reconnaissance showed the terrain transformed into an impassable moonscape. The expected assault never materialized. Captured documents later confirmed that the regiment had suffered catastrophic casualties. Estimates ranged from 300 to 700 dead, and its command structure had disintegrated. Marine defenders witnessed the arc light effects from uncomfortably close range. The nearest strikes landed 1,000 meters from friendly positions, inside the minimum safe distance for most artillery systems. Marines reported that the ground shook violently, that equipment vibrated off shelves, that the explosion's roar drowned out all other sound. Some strikes triggered secondary explosions as North Vietnamese ammunition caches detonated. At night, the flashes lit the sky like continuous lightning. One Marine officer reported that watching arc light was like observing the wrath of God made manifest. An apt theological metaphor for industrial-scale annihilation. By late March, the siege had effectively ended. North Vietnamese forces withdrew, their combat powers shattered. When Marine and Army units fought through to relieve Khe Sanh in April, they encountered only rear-guard elements. The main NVA formations had retreated westward into Laos. Beyond American ground pursuit, the battlefield revealed the siege's cost. Thousands of overlapping bomb craters, destroyed bunkers, abandoned equipment, and mass graves hastily filled before retreat. Post-battle assessment confirmed what commanders suspected. Air power alone had broken the siege. Ground forces defending Khe Sanh never conducted offensive operations beyond their immediate perimeter. They did not counterattack. They did not flank the besiegers. They simply endured while B-52s destroyed the enemy's capacity to sustain offensive operations. The Marines suffered 274 killed and approximately 2,000 wounded. Tragic but sustainable casualties for a garrison holding against forces outnumbering them 3-1. North Vietnamese losses remain disputed, but conservative estimates placed killed in action at 5,000 to 10,000, with thousands more wounded or incapacitated by psychological trauma. General Giap never publicly acknowledged Khe Sanh as a defeat, but his tactical writings afterward reflected lessons learned. He emphasized dispersal, concealment, and avoiding concentration of forces under observable conditions. Post-war Vietnamese military histories omit detailed discussion of Khe Sanh, focusing instead on the Tet Offensive's political impact. The silence speaks volumes. Khe Sanh demonstrated B-52 effectiveness in siege warfare, but arc light applications extended far beyond defensive operations. Throughout 1968-1972, planners integrated strategic bombing into offensive campaigns, interdiction efforts, and even close air support at the tactical edge of battle. The most extensive application involved interdiction of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the network of roads, paths, and waterways through Laos and Cambodia that supplied NVA and Viet Cong forces in South Vietnam. The trail represented North Vietnam's logistical lifeline. Weapons, ammunition, food, medical supplies, and replacement personnel flowed southward in continuous convoys carried by truck, bicycle, and porters. Cutting this supply line became an American strategic priority. Operation Commando Hunt, running from 1968 through 1972, employed B-52s as the primary interdiction weapon. The trail's nature, dispersed, concealed, constantly shifting, made it resistant to tactical airstrikes. A fighter bomber might destroy a truck or crater a road section, but trail watchers quickly bypassed damage and resumed traffic. B-52s offered a different solution: saturation bombing of entire trail segments, road junctions, and suspected storage areas. Rather than targeting individual vehicles, arc light missions devastated square kilometers of terrain, rendering entire route sections impassable and forcing the enemy into predictable detours where further strikes waited. The operational statistics stagger comprehension. Between November 1968 and March 1972, B-52s flew over 12,000 arc light sorties against trail targets in Laos alone. They delivered approximately 1.1 million tons of ordnance. Roughly 60% of the total arc light tonnage dropped during the entire war. Photo reconnaissance documented thousands of destroyed trucks, bulldozers, and supply caches. Electronic sensors recorded dramatic declines in traffic during intensive bombing periods. Yet the trail never closed. North Vietnamese ingenuity, Soviet logistical support, and sheer determination kept supplies flowing. Engineers rebuilt roads under jungle canopy, invisible to aerial reconnaissance. Supplies moved at night using minimal lighting. Critical materials traveled by porter through terrain inaccessible to vehicles. The trail became the ultimate test of endurance versus attrition. American technological power against human adaptability. Arc light also supported ground offensives. During the 1970 Cambodian incursion, B-52 strikes preceded American and ARVN advances, destroying NVA base areas and command complexes. Intelligence indicated that the Central Office for South Vietnam, COSVN, the headquarters coordinating communist operations in the South, operated from sanctuaries in Cambodia's border regions. Arc light missions pounded suspected COSVN locations, forcing continuous relocations and disrupting command and control functions. The effectiveness of these strikes remains controversial. Ground forces discovered massive bunker complexes, supply depots, and training camps, evidence of sustained NVA presence. They also found recent signs of hasty evacuation, suggesting that arc light had driven defenders out, but not destroyed them. Critics argued that the enemy simply dispersed, waiting for American forces to withdraw before returning. Proponents countered that disrupting enemy operations, even temporarily, provided strategic advantage by preventing coordinated offensives. Close air support represented arc light's most tactically risky application. Conventional doctrine held that strategic bombers had no role in direct support of ground combat. Their area weapons lacked the precision for danger-close engagements. Khe Sanh challenged this assumption. If B-52s could strike effectively within 1,000 meters of friendly positions under controlled conditions, perhaps they could provide direct support during fluid combat. The results proved mixed. Several engagements demonstrated devastating effectiveness. During the 1972 Easter Offensive, when NVA mechanized forces, equipped with Soviet T-54 tanks and supported by mobile artillery, invaded across the DMZ, arc light strikes shattered entire armored columns. On April 27, 1972, 3 B-52 cells caught the 308th Division's Mechanized Regiment on open ground near Dong Ha. The strikes destroyed or disabled dozens of tanks and armored personnel carriers, killed hundreds of infantry, and turned the advance into a chaotic rout. ARVN forces, supported by American advisors, counterattacked and reclaimed lost territory. Other engagements highlighted risks. In April 1972, an arc light strike intended for NVA positions near An Loc fell short, impacting South Vietnamese defensive lines. The errant bombing killed dozens of ARVN soldiers and added to the chaos of the siege. Similar incidents occurred sporadically throughout the war. Navigation errors, communication failures, or target misidentification resulting in friendly fire. Each incident reinforced concerns about employing area weapons near friendly forces. Despite risks, commanders continued requesting arc light support when facing overwhelming enemy pressure. The psychological effect alone justified the risk. NVA soldiers feared B-52 strikes above all other weapons. Captured documents and prisoner interrogations consistently identified arc light as the most demoralizing aspect of combat against American forces. One political officer's diary, recovered near the Cambodian border, described the terror explicitly. He wrote that soldiers would face artillery, airstrikes, even napalm with some measure of courage. But arc light broke men's spirits. The invisibility, the suddenness, the totality of destruction overwhelmed rational thought. The industrial scale of arc light operations obscures a fundamental truth. Each mission depended on highly trained professionals who faced significant risks and endured grueling operational tempos. A B-52 combat crew consisted of 6 members: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, radar navigator, bombardier, electronic warfare officer, and gunner. Each position required extensive training, months of specialized schooling followed by qualification flights and tactical evaluations. The crew functioned as an integrated team. Failure by any member compromised the entire mission. Missions from Guam averaged 12 to 14 hours, taking off, flying 2,500 miles to Vietnam, striking targets, returning to base. Crews spent the majority of these hours in cramped, noisy conditions. The B-52's cockpit, designed in the 1950s, lacked modern ergonomics. Controls required physical strength to operate. Instrument panels overwhelmed with dials and gauges. Navigation demanded continuous attention to position, fuel consumption, and timing. The gunner, isolated in the tail turret, monitored defensive systems alone for hours, separated from the rest of the crew except by intercom. Aerial refueling represented one of the most demanding aspects of B-52 operations. Each bomber required multiple refuelings per mission, taking on tens of thousands of gallons from Khe Sanh 135 tankers while flying in formation at 300 miles per hour. The procedure demanded absolute precision. The bomber positioned itself behind and below the tanker. The pilot flew formation maintaining exact relative position. The boom operator guided the refueling probe into the B-52's receptacle. Fuel transferred, disconnect, and separation. Turbulence, weather, mechanical issues, or pilot fatigue could turn refueling into a nightmare. The mid-air collision that killed 8 crew members during the first arc light mission resulted from refueling error, a reminder that routine procedures at altitude carried lethal consequences. Combat over Vietnam introduced additional stress. Although most arc light missions struck targets in South Vietnam or Laos, outside heavy anti-aircraft coverage, crews understood that Soviet-supplied air defenses could reach them. Electronic warfare officers monitored threat receivers continuously, listening for radar emissions that might indicate missile launches. Fighters occasionally appeared, North Vietnamese MiG-17s and MiG-21s probing B-52 formations, testing defenses, seeking opportunities. The tail gunner's .450 caliber machine guns provided the only direct defense. On rare occasions, gunners engaged hostile aircraft. Staff Sergeant Samuel Turner shot down a MiG-21 on December 18, 1972, the first B-52 aerial victory, a remarkable achievement given that the bomber was never designed for air-to-air combat. The operational tempo strained crews physically and psychologically. During peak periods, such as Khe Sanh or Linebacker 2, Strategic Air Command maintained continuous rotations. Crews flew, landed, debriefed, rested minimally, then flew again. 12-hour missions followed by 12-hour turnarounds became standard. Fatigue accumulated. Men made mistakes. Safety incidents increased. Command recognized the problem but maintained the pressure. Operational necessity outweighed individual welfare. Captain John Mize, a B-52D pilot who flew 87 arc light missions between 1967 and 1968, later described the psychological burden. He reported that the most difficult aspect was not the danger, though that remained ever present, but the abstractness of the work. Crews dropped bombs from altitudes where they could not see targets, could not observe results, and rarely learned whether missions succeeded or failed. They simply flew the coordinates, released ordnance on command, and returned to base. The disconnect between effort and observable outcome created a sense of detachment, as if they were participants in an industrial process rather than combat operations. Yet when intelligence confirmed arc light effectiveness, crews felt profound satisfaction. After Khe Sanh, Marine commanders personally thanked B-52 crews, explaining that without their strikes, the base would have fallen. Pilots and navigators, accustomed to abstract target coordinates, heard testimony from men whose lives depended on their precision. The validation mattered. It transformed the work from mechanical routine into meaningful contribution. The most dangerous missions came during Linebacker 2, December 18 to 29, 1972, when B-52s struck Hanoi and Haiphong directly. For the first time, bombers penetrated the most heavily defended airspace in history, denser than anything experienced over Germany in World War II. The North Vietnamese, supported by Soviet advisors, concentrated every available air defense asset, MiG fighters, radar-guided anti-aircraft artillery, and approximately 1,000 S-75 surface-to-air missiles. The operational plan required bombers to fly predictable routes at consistent altitudes. Tactical constraints necessary for coordination, but catastrophic for survivability. North Vietnamese defenders quickly identified the patterns. S-75 batteries positioned themselves along known approach corridors, pre-calculated firing solutions, and waited. On the first night, December 18th, 3 B-52s went down. On December 20th, 6 more were lost. The single bloodiest night of the campaign. Crews faced a terrible calculus. Standing orders prohibited deviation from assigned routes. Maintaining formation integrity and timing was essential for overwhelming defenses through concentration. But this discipline meant flying directly into known missile engagement zones. Pilots watched warning lights illuminate as radars locked on. Electronic warfare officers initiated countermeasures, dispensed chaff, activated jammers. Navigators maintained course despite terror. Then came the missiles. Orange streaks climbing through darkness, proximity fuses detonating, shrapnel tearing through aluminum skin. Second Lieutenant Bob Hudson, a navigator on a B-52D flying on December 20th, later testified about his crew's experience. Multiple S-75s tracked their aircraft. The electronic warfare officer reported continuous missile guidance signals. Then came impact, not a direct hit, but close enough. Shrapnel punctured the fuselage, severed hydraulic lines, and started fires. The aircraft became uncontrollable. The pilot ordered bailout. Hudson ejected at 30,000 feet over North Vietnam, parachuted into enemy territory, and spent the next 3 months as a prisoner of war. His aircraft commander and 3 other crew members died in the crash. Despite losses, Linebacker 2 continued. Strategic Air Command adjusted tactics, varying altitudes, compressing time over target windows, increasing electronic warfare support, and coordinating with Navy strikes to saturate defenses. By December 26th, North Vietnamese air defenses showed signs of collapse. Missile launch rates declined dramatically. They had exhausted their inventory. MiG sorties decreased. Attrition and pilot fatigue degraded fighter effectiveness. On December 27th and 28th, B-52s struck with near impunity. By December 29th, when operations concluded, the campaign had achieved its objectives. North Vietnam's strategic air defense system was depleted, industrial targets destroyed, and political leadership forced back to negotiations. The human cost remained sobering. 15 B-52s lost, 33 crew members killed, 33 captured, and 26 rescued. For the families of the 33 who died, the strategic success provided little comfort. For the 33 prisoners, years of captivity awaited. For the survivors, the psychological scars of flying into sustained anti-aircraft fire would never fully heal. Yet the mission's success validated fundamental principles. Courage, training, and tactical adaptation allowed crews to penetrate defenses that theoretically should have been impenetrable. The combination of technological capability and human determination proved decisive. Soviet analysts later acknowledged that while the S-75 system performed as designed, American electronic warfare, tactical flexibility, and crew professionalism had ultimately overcome it. The Vietnam War served as the most comprehensive combat evaluation of Soviet weapon systems and military doctrine conducted outside of direct superpower confrontation. For Moscow, the conflict represented an opportunity to test equipment, validate tactics, and gather intelligence on American capabilities, all without risking direct war with the United States. Soviet involvement extended far beyond weapons sales. Military advisors deployed to North Vietnam, operating air defense systems, training crews, and sometimes directly controlling engagements. Soviet naval intelligence vessels, positioned offshore, monitored American electronic warfare systems, collected signals intelligence, and transmitted data back to analysis centers in the USSR. Soviet technicians examined wreckage of American aircraft, recovering components for reverse engineering. The entire war became a laboratory where Soviet military science observed American technology in action and adapted accordingly. The Arc Light campaign provided particularly valuable data. Soviet air defense doctrine in the 1960s emphasized integrated systems combining radar, early warning, fighter interception, and surface-to-air missiles to create overlapping kill zones. The theory held that no attacking force could penetrate coordinated defenses, delivering synchronized fire from multiple systems. Vietnam tested this doctrine under real combat conditions and exposed critical vulnerabilities. The B-52's operational altitude, radar cross-section characteristics, and electronic countermeasures proved more effective than Soviet planners anticipated. Fansong radars struggled to maintain consistent track on bombers at maximum range, particularly when electronic jamming degraded signal quality. The S-75 missile's performance envelope, theoretically extending to 60,000 feet, proved less effective in practice against targets employing modern countermeasures. Launch success rates, the percentage of missiles that successfully engaged targets, fell well below peacetime test results. Colonel General Semyon Ivanov, a Soviet air defense specialist who served as advisor in North Vietnam during 1967 to 1968, later wrote about the challenges. He acknowledged that American electronic warfare systems were more sophisticated than Soviet intelligence had assessed. The ALQ-155 countermeasures suite aboard the B-52D generated false targets, masked true position, and jammed guidance radars with techniques Soviet engineers had not anticipated. Ivanov reported that North Vietnamese crews, despite intensive training, often could not distinguish real bombers from electronic phantoms until weapons had already been released. More problematic was the operational tempo. Soviet doctrine assumed that air campaigns would involve episodic raids, concentrated attacks followed by periods of reduced activity, allowing defenses to rearm, reposition, and recover. Arc Light operated continuously. The relentless succession of strikes, 60 sorties, daily during peak periods, exhausted missile inventories, degraded radar equipment through constant operation, and psychologically stressed crews beyond their training. Battery commanders faced impossible choices: engage every target and deplete missiles within days, or conserve ammunition and allow some bombers through unmolested. Soviet advisors recommended tactical innovations to counter American advantages. They advocated deploying dummy sites to draw anti-radiation missile attacks while real batteries remained silent. They suggested coordinated salvo firings, multiple batteries launching simultaneously to overwhelm electronic countermeasures through numerical superiority. They emphasized mobility, urging North Vietnamese commanders to treat S-75 batteries as expendable assets that fired once, then immediately displaced to avoid counter-battery strikes. These adaptations achieved partial success. The tactics employed during Linebacker II in December 1972 reflected Soviet doctrine at its most refined. Advisors coordinated the air defense effort, directing simultaneous engagements from multiple batteries against individual bomber formations. The approach generated the highest B-52 loss rate of the war, 15 aircraft in 11 days. Yet even this represented tactical failure. The losses proved insufficient to halt operations. And by campaign's end, North Vietnam's air defense network had collapsed from attrition. Post-war Soviet military analysis acknowledged the lessons candidly. A 1975 General Staff study on Vietnam air defense operations concluded that strategic bombers employing advanced electronic warfare systems and supported by comprehensive SEAD operations could penetrate integrated air defenses, provided the attacking force accepted losses and maintained operational tempo. The study recommended substantial investments in electronic countermeasures, improved missile guidance systems resistant to jamming, and doctrine emphasizing system redundancy to sustain operations despite attrition. These lessons directly influenced Soviet air defense development in the late 1970s and 1980s. The S-300 system, successor to the S-75, incorporated frequency-agile radars harder to jam, more sophisticated tracking algorithms, and faster engagement cycles. Soviet doctrine evolved to emphasize mobile operations, deception, and coordinated fires across multiple frequency bands. The entire experience in Vietnam transformed how Soviet military planners conceptualized air defense against technologically advanced adversaries. Beyond technical lessons, Soviet observers recognized a more fundamental reality. American military-industrial capacity exceeded Warsaw Pact assumptions. The ability to sustain 1-800 bomber sorties monthly while simultaneously conducting tactical air operations, maintaining global logistics networks, and developing next-generation weapon systems demonstrated an economic foundation that Soviet planners found deeply troubling. The United States was waging a limited war, expending roughly 3% of GDP on Vietnam, while the USSR struggled to match American technology despite dedicating substantially higher portions of national resources to defense. Marshal Andrei Grechko, Soviet Minister of Defense from 1967 to 1976, reportedly told Politburo members that Vietnam revealed the true scope of American military advantage. The United States could afford to experiment, absorb losses, adapt tactics, and sustain operations indefinitely because their economic base supported it. Soviet military power, while formidable, lacked equivalent depth. In a protracted conventional conflict against NATO, Soviet forces might achieve tactical victories, but could not match the sustained operational tempo that American logistics enabled. This recognition influenced Soviet strategic thinking throughout the 1970s. Rather than attempting to match American capabilities across all domains, Soviet planners emphasized asymmetric advantages: theater nuclear weapons, mass armor formations, and operational surprise through preemptive strikes. The Arclight experience confirmed that in a competition of industrial attrition, matching bomber sorties, replacing losses, and sustaining global supply chains, the United States held decisive advantage. Behind the strategic analyses and technological discussions lies a brutal arithmetic. Arc Light operations killed tens of thousands of human beings, most dying without ever seeing or hearing the weapon that destroyed them. The mathematics of this killing provides insight into the campaign's effectiveness and its terrible cost. Calculating precise enemy casualties from arc light strikes remains impossible. The nature of saturation bombing, obliterating target areas through overlapping explosions, often left no identifiable remains. North Vietnamese doctrine emphasized immediate burial of dead to prevent American body counts from confirming effectiveness. Units dispersed after taking casualties, making comprehensive accounting impossible. Even captured enemy documents provided only fragmentary data, as record-keeping collapsed under sustained bombardment. Nevertheless, American intelligence analysts assembled estimates based on multiple sources, sensor data indicating troop concentrations before strikes, post-strike reconnaissance showing destruction, signals intelligence revealing unit strength reductions, prisoner interrogations, and captured documents. These sources suggested that arc light missions achieved an average casualty rate, killed and seriously wounded, of approximately 15 to 20% of enemy forces within target boxes. Against concentrated formations, casualty rates exceeded 50%. Applying these percentages to known arc light statistics produces staggering totals. Between 1965 and 1973, B-52s flew approximately 126,000 combat sorties over Southeast Asia, delivering roughly 2.7 million tons of ordnance. If each sortie averaged 3 aircraft, striking a target box containing 100 enemy personnel, conservative estimates on both counts, and achieved a 20% casualty rate, the cumulative killed and wounded exceeds 800,000. Even reducing assumptions dramatically still yields casualty figures in the hundreds of thousands. North Vietnamese sources rarely acknowledge these losses publicly. Post-war casualty statistics released by Hanoi combine all causes of death, combat, disease, accidents, making it impossible to isolate arc light-specific mortality. The official figure of 1.1 million military deaths between 1965 and 75 includes casualties from all American operations, ARVN actions, accidents, and disease. Western historians estimate that aerial bombardment, including tactical strikes, arc light, and the Linebacker campaigns, accounted for perhaps 40 to 50% of total North Vietnamese military deaths, suggesting 400,000 to 550,000 killed by airpower across the entire war. These numbers represent individual human tragedies multiplied beyond comprehension. Each casualty was someone's son, brother, father, husband. Each death left families grieving, communities mourning, and futures unrealized. The soldiers killed by arc light did not die in glorious charges or heroic last stands. They died invisibly, many buried alive in collapsing tunnels. Others simply erased by overpressure that pulverized tissue without leaving marks. Their deaths served causes they believed in: national liberation, reunification, resistance to foreign intervention. But the manner of dying offered neither honor nor meaning, only sudden obliteration. American casualty statistics present a stark contrast. Not a single B-52 crew member died in combat over South Vietnam, Laos, or Cambodia during the entire Arc Light campaign from 1965 to 1972. The aircraft's operational altitude placed it beyond the reach of most anti-aircraft systems. Its defensive systems and electronic countermeasures proved effective against the threats it faced. The loss of 2 aircraft during the first mission in 1965 resulted from mid-air collision, not enemy action. Only during Linebacker 2, when B-52s penetrated the heavily defended airspace around Hanoi and Haiphong, did crews face lethal danger, and even then, the loss rate remained under 2%. This asymmetry, hundreds of thousands of enemy casualties versus negligible friendly losses, represents the mathematical reality of technological advantage. The United States possessed weapons that could kill at distances and altitudes where return fire proved impossible. The North Vietnamese and their Soviet advisors attempted to counter this advantage through air defense systems. But even the most sophisticated SAMs achieved only marginal effectiveness against properly supported B-52 operations. The kill ratio, enemy killed per friendly death, for arc-light operations approached infinity for most of the war. Even including Linebacker 2 losses, the ratio exceeded 10,000-1. No military operation in history achieved comparable exchange rates on such scale. This was not warfare as traditionally understood, where opposing forces met, engaged, and suffered comparable casualties. This was industrial-scale annihilation, where one side possessed overwhelming advantage and employed it without mercy. Critics of arc-light operations argue that these statistics prove the campaign's moral bankruptcy, that killing on such scale, particularly against an enemy unable to respond effectively, constitutes atrocity regardless of military justification. They point out that many casualties were conscripts, young men drafted into service defending their homeland against foreign intervention, whose deaths achieved no strategic purpose because the war ultimately ended in American withdrawal. Defenders counter that arc-light saved American and Allied lives by destroying enemy forces before they could engage friendly troops. They note that every North Vietnamese soldier killed by bombing was one fewer soldier shooting at Marines, one fewer combatant laying mines, one fewer participant in attacks on civilians. The asymmetry resulted from superior technology and training, advantages that American society created through economic strength, educational systems, and innovative culture. Utilizing these advantages to minimize friendly casualties while maximizing enemy losses represented sound military practice, not moral failure. The debate continues decades later, but the mathematics remain undisputed. Arc-light killed more efficiently than any conventional bombing campaign in military history. The cost per enemy killed, measured in dollars, fuel, ordnance, and aircrew risk, remained acceptable within the strategic framework that authorized the operations. Whether the broader war justified these costs, political, economic, and moral, remains contested. But the tactical effectiveness is beyond question. For all its destructive power and tactical effectiveness, arc-light could not achieve strategic victory. The campaign demonstrated that technological superiority, industrial capacity, and tactical dominance at the point of contact do not automatically translate into successful war outcomes when political objectives remain ambiguous and enemy will remains unbroken. The fundamental limitation was geographical. Arc-light could devastate any target within striking range, but it could not strike the enemy's strategic center of gravity. North Vietnam's political leadership, war-making infrastructure, and international support base. Political constraints prohibited bombing Hanoi systematically until 1972. Restrictions protected port facilities where Soviet and Chinese supplies arrived. Buffer zones along the Chinese border remained off-limits to avoid provoking Chinese intervention. These sanctuaries allowed North Vietnam to rebuild, rearm, and continue the war, despite tactical defeats in the South. Even when restrictions loosened during Linebacker operations in 1972, bombing could not destroy North Vietnam's capacity for sustained conflict. The country's agrarian economy, dispersed population, and externally supplied logistics made it resistant to strategic bombardment. Unlike Germany or Japan in World War II, North Vietnam possessed minimal industrial infrastructure to target. Its war-making capability depended on supplies from the Soviet Union and China, not domestic production. Destroying factories, power plants, and bridges inflicted hardship, but did not cripple the war effort because material continued flowing from external sources. Arc-Light's area bombing methodology, while devastating against concentrated forces, proved ineffective against dispersed guerrilla operations. The Viet Cong operated in small units, often squad or platoon strength, spread across thousands of villages. They cached weapons underground, avoided large formations, and blended into civilian populations. B-52 strikes required known target locations and concentration of forces, conditions the Viet Cong systematically avoided. Intelligence seldom achieved the precision necessary to target small units effectively. Consequently, Arc-Light had minimal impact on Viet Cong operations in heavily populated areas where guerrilla warfare proved most effective. The Ho Chi Minh Trail demonstrated Arc-Light's limitations against adaptive logistics networks. Despite 12,000 sorties and over 1 million tons of ordnance dropped on trail segments in Laos, supplies continued reaching southern battlefields. North Vietnamese engineers rebuilt roads overnight. Truck traffic shifted to alternative routes. Critical supplies moved by porter through terrain immune to aerial attack. The trail became a test of systemic resilience versus destructive capacity, and the system proved more resilient than anticipated. Intelligence limitations constrained effectiveness. Arc-Light struck coordinates, not observed targets. The system depended on accurate intelligence to identify enemy concentrations worthy of saturation bombing. When intelligence proved accurate, results were devastating. When intelligence was outdated, incomplete, or wrong, Arc-Light struck empty jungle, expending enormous resources for no military benefit. No reliable estimates exist for the percentage of Arc-Light sorties that struck evacuated or non-existent targets. But prisoner interrogations suggested that North Vietnamese units, aware of American reconnaissance patterns, often relocated before strikes arrived. The most profound limitation was psychological and political. Arc-Light could kill enemy soldiers by the thousands, destroy their equipment, shatter their formations, and terrify survivors. But it could not break their will to continue fighting. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces absorbed casualties that would have destroyed most conventional armies, then reconstituted, returned to battle, and continued operations. The commitment to reunification, reinforced by nationalist ideology and decades of anti-colonial struggle, proved more durable than American commitment to an ambiguous mission in a distant land. American public opinion, not North Vietnamese morale, ultimately constrained operations. Television broadcasts showing devastated landscapes, civilian casualties, and the apparent futility of bombing jungles turned American sentiment against the war. The tonnage dropped, the sorties flown, and the enemy killed. All became evidence of a military campaign disconnected from achievable political objectives. Congress restricted funding, prohibited expansion of ground operations, and eventually forced withdrawal, regardless of tactical successes. The disconnect between tactical victory and strategic failure defined the American experience in Vietnam. At every level of combat, individual engagements, battles, campaigns, American forces demonstrated superiority. Kill ratios favored the United States overwhelmingly. Terrain seized remained held. Major enemy offensives were defeated. Yet none of this translated into strategic success because the enemy's strategic objective, outlasting American will, proved achievable despite tactical defeats. Arc Light epitomized this paradox. The campaign achieved everything asked of it militarily, destroying enemy forces, supporting besieged positions, interdicting supply lines, and inflicting disproportionate casualties. But military success proved insufficient because the war's outcome depended on factors beyond bombing's reach: political will, international support, and the fundamental question of whether South Vietnam could develop into a viable, self-sustaining state. The Arc Light campaign concluded officially in August 1973, when the last B-52 combat sortie departed Southeast Asian airspace. The final statistics were recorded, analyzed, and filed. 126,615 sorties, 2,696,173 tons of ordnance delivered, enemy casualties estimated in the hundreds of thousands, 15 aircraft lost to hostile action, and a tactical record unmatched in bombing history. Yet the campaign's legacy extends beyond statistics. Arc Light fundamentally changed how military planners conceptualize the application of strategic airpower. The B-52, designed for nuclear Armageddon, had proven adaptable to conventional tactical missions. The systems developed to support Arc Light, precision navigation, coordinated logistics, electronic warfare integration, and suppression of enemy air defenses, became foundational elements of modern air operations. Every major American air campaign since Vietnam, from Desert Storm to Afghanistan, reflects lessons learned during Arc Light operations. The North Vietnamese perspective, articulated decades later by veterans and historians, acknowledges Arc Light's devastating impact. General Tran Van Tra, who commanded communist forces in the South during the war's final years, wrote that B-52 strikes represented the most feared and respected American weapon. He acknowledged that operations near known Arc Light target areas inflicted psychological stress comparable to casualties themselves. Soldiers developed acute anxiety disorders, anticipating invisible death from the sky. Unit cohesion suffered when troops prioritized personal survival over tactical objectives. Lieutenant General Philip Davidson, MACV intelligence chief from 1967 to 1969, later assessed Arc Light as tactically effective but strategically insufficient. He argued that the campaign proved American technological and industrial superiority, but also revealed the limitations of military power divorced from coherent political strategy. Davidson wrote that Arc Light could have changed the war's outcome if coupled with decisive ground offensives into North Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. But political constraints prohibited such escalation. Consequently, Arc Light became a tool for managing the conflict rather than winning it. Soviet military analysts produced classified assessments acknowledging American air superiority, but noting that superior technology had not prevented strategic defeat. A 1975 General Staff study concluded that the Vietnam War demonstrated that political will and asymmetric tactics could offset technological disadvantage, provided the weaker party accepted casualties and sustained operations over extended periods. The study influenced Soviet doctrine in Afghanistan, where Soviet forces employed similar heavy bombardment tactics against Mujahideen guerrillas, with comparable tactical success and strategic failure. For the B-52 crews who flew Arc Light missions, the experience remained complex and often troubling. Many veterans expressed pride in their professionalism, the technical challenges overcome, and the lives saved, particularly at Khe Sanh, where Arc Light proved decisive. Yet the abstractness of high-altitude bombing, the disconnect between effort and observable results, and the knowledge that they killed thousands who never saw them coming, created moral ambiguity that some struggled to reconcile. Captain John Mize, reflecting on his 87 Arc Light missions, later wrote that he believed the operations were militarily justified and professionally executed. He emphasized that crews followed orders, struck military targets, and conducted themselves according to laws of war. But he also acknowledged that the sheer scale of killing, mathematically efficient, technologically enabled, psychologically distant, raised questions about warfare's nature in the modern era. He noted that previous generations fought enemies they could see, creating psychological frameworks where courage, honor, and sacrifice had clear meaning. Arc Light removed those frameworks, replacing them with industrial processes where death came from invisible sources at incomprehensible distances. The physical legacy remains visible decades later. The landscape of eastern Cambodia, southern Laos, and the former DMZ region remains scarred by bomb craters, some now filled with water, creating pockmarked terrain visible from satellite imagery. Unexploded ordnance continues killing and maiming civilians. The residual cost of saturation bombing, where not every munition detonated on impact. Clearance efforts continue, but millions of acres remain contaminated, rendering land unusable for agriculture and posing perpetual danger to populations living near former battlefields. The strategic debate about Arc Light's value remains unsettled. Military historians arguing for the campaign's importance emphasize that without B-52 support, American casualties would have increased dramatically. South Vietnam might have collapsed earlier, and negotiating leverage would have diminished. They point to Khe Sanh as definitive proof that Arc Light could achieve objectives impossible through other means. They argue that the campaign's failure to win the war reflected political constraints, not military inadequacy. Critics counter that Arc Light exemplified the war's fundamental misdirection, applying overwhelming force against symptoms while ignoring causes. They argue that bombing could not create political stability in South Vietnam, could not address corruption, could not build government legitimacy, and could not convince rural populations to support Saigon. The resources expended on Arc Light, billions of dollars, millions of man-hours, and incalculable Vietnamese suffering, might have achieved more if directed toward economic development, political reform, and genuine nation-building rather than destruction. Both perspectives contain truth. Arc Light was simultaneously a triumph of military-industrial capability and a demonstration of military power's limitations in achieving political objectives. It saved American lives while killing hundreds of thousands. It showcased technological superiority while failing to achieve strategic victory. It represented American capacity for overwhelming force and American inability to translate force into sustainable political outcomes. The cold mathematics of Arc Light, 126,615 sorties, 2.7 million tons, hundreds of thousands killed, fails to capture what the campaign meant to those who experienced it, planned it, or endured it. Numbers quantify destruction, but cannot convey terror, courage, determination, or the moral weight of industrial-scale killing. For the Marines at Khe Sanh, Arc Light meant survival. The strikes that landed perilously close to their perimeter, shaking the earth beneath them, represented hope delivered through violence. They knew that every explosion tearing through enemy positions was one less soldier who would storm their lines, one less artillery piece that would shell their bunkers, one less casualty they would suffer. The psychological comfort of knowing that invisible guardians circled above, ready to unleash annihilation on command, sustained morale during the darkest hours of siege. These men did not debate the ethics of saturation bombing or question the strategic utility of tactical airpower. They were grateful to be alive, and they credited B-52s with keeping them that way. For North Vietnamese soldiers dug into positions around that same perimeter, arc light meant unrelenting terror. The strikes arrived without warning. No engine noise, no sirens, just sudden cataclysm. Men lived in constant anticipation of death from an enemy they could never see, never engage, never escape. Some broke psychologically, abandoning positions despite officers' threats. Others endured, their courage sustained by ideology, discipline, or fatalistic acceptance. Those who survived carried psychological scars for life, acute startle responses, anxiety disorders, and nightmares of Earth erupting beneath them. For B-52 crew members, arc light meant long hours of professional routine punctuated by moments of existential vulnerability. Pilots and navigators flew coordinates, released ordnance, and returned to base, rarely seeing the results of their work. The psychological distance, dropping bombs from 6 miles high onto targets they never observed, created moral insulation that some welcomed and others found troubling. During Linebacker 2, when the distance collapsed and crews faced lethal defenses, the abstract became viscerally real. Men watched friends' aircraft explode, ejected into enemy territory, or returned to base with fuselages shredded by shrapnel. Those experiences transformed arc light from routine operation into combat in the traditional sense. Terrifying, immediate, and personal. For Soviet advisors supporting North Vietnamese air defenses, arc light represented professional challenge and geopolitical significance. These men, far from home, operated sophisticated weapons systems against the world's most advanced air force. They trained Vietnamese crews, coordinated defenses, and sometimes directly controlled engagements, all while officially invisible, their presence denied by both governments to avoid escalation. When their S-75 batteries shot down B-52s during Linebacker 2, Soviet technicians and officers celebrated victories that advanced Cold War competition without triggering direct superpower conflict. Yet they also witnessed the limitations of Soviet technology against American electronic warfare and operational tempo, sobering lessons that influenced their professional assessments and national strategy. For American political and military leadership, arc light embodied both capability and frustration. Commanders possessed the most powerful conventional weapon in history, capable of destroying any target within reach, yet constrained from striking targets that mattered strategically. They could obliterate NVA divisions in the south, but not bomb Hanoi's leadership complex. They could interdict the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but not strike the ports where Soviet supplies arrived. They could win every battle, but not the war. Arc light became a symbol of overwhelming military power rendered strategically insufficient by political constraints, a reality that frustrated officers trained to achieve decisive victory through superior force. The human stories behind the statistics reveal complexity that numbers conceal. There was the B-52 navigator who completed 100 missions without ever seeing Vietnam below the clouds, whose entire war experience consisted of instrument panels, radio chatter, and the abstract knowledge that his calculations resulted in explosions somewhere beneath him. There was the North Vietnamese artillery commander who survived 7 arc light strikes through extraordinary luck and discipline, who lost his entire battery in the 8th strike, and who spent the rest of the war training replacements while struggling with survivor's guilt. There was the Marine forward air controller who directed arc light strikes so close to his position that shrapnel landed in his foxhole, who credited those strikes with saving his unit, and who spent decades afterward wondering how many men died because of coordinates he transmitted. These individual experiences, multiplied across hundreds of thousands of participants, created a collective historical experience that defies simple interpretation. Arc light was simultaneously heroic and tragic, necessary and wasteful, effective and futile. It demonstrated what industrial civilization could achieve when mobilized for destruction, and what such destruction could not achieve when divorced from sustainable political objectives. The fullest understanding of Arclight's impact requires hearing from those who opposed it, the commanders who planned operations despite the bombardment, the soldiers who fought through it, and the Soviet advisors who attempted to counter it. Their testimonies, published in memoirs, official histories, and interviews conducted decades after the war, provide perspectives that American sources alone cannot offer. General Vo Nguyen Giap, architect of North Vietnamese military strategy and the commander who directed operations at Khe Sanh, rarely discussed Arclight directly in his published writings. His memoirs focus on political military strategy, emphasizing revolutionary warfare principles and the necessity of coordinating military action with political objectives. Yet, in a 1983 interview with Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci, Giap acknowledged the devastating impact of American airpower. He stated that B-52 strikes created operational challenges unprecedented in his military experience, forcing continuous adaptation of tactics and placement of forces. He noted that traditional concentration of forces, essential for major offensives, became prohibitively dangerous when American intelligence could detect such concentrations and respond with Arclight within hours. Giap's admission carries weight precisely because he made it reluctantly, years after victory, when acknowledging American tactical effectiveness no longer threatened morale or undermined political narratives. He confirmed what American commanders claimed, that Arclight constrained North Vietnamese operations, inflicted severe casualties, and forced defensive measures that reduced offensive capability. His strategic assessment, however, emphasized that tactical setbacks proved acceptable because North Vietnam's political objectives, outlasting American will, did not require tactical parity, only sustained resistance. Colonel Bui Tin, a North Vietnamese army officer who served throughout the war and later became a journalist and critic of the communist government after defecting, provided more candid assessments. In his 1995 memoir, Following Ho Chi Minh, Bui Tin described Arclight as psychologically devastating to troops who endured it. He wrote that soldiers developed a fatalistic attitude toward B-52 strikes, recognizing that survival depended entirely on luck rather than skill, preparation, or courage. Units targeted by Arclight simply ceased to exist. There was no defense, no evasion, no fighting back. The randomness of survival created psychological trauma that military discipline struggled to contain. Bui Tin reported that after major Arclight strikes, units required weeks to reconstitute not merely because of casualties, but because survivors needed time to recover psychologically. He described soldiers who developed acute startle responses, jumping at any sudden sound, unable to sleep, and showing symptoms that Western psychiatrists would recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. The North Vietnamese military medical system, lacking modern psychiatric understanding and resources, addressed these symptoms through political indoctrination and peer pressure rather than treatment, with mixed effectiveness. Truong Nhu Thanh, a founder of the National Liberation Front, Viet Cong's political organization, who later defected and published his memoir, A Viet Cong Memoir, in 1985, described experiencing an Arclight strike personally. He was visiting a Viet Cong base camp in Tay Ninh province in 1968 when bombers struck without warning. He wrote that he was eating lunch when the earth exploded. The experience transcended description, not merely loud or violent, but reality itself fragmenting. He lost consciousness, woke buried under debris, and emerged to find the camp obliterated. Of approximately 80 personnel present, 47 died instantly. Most of the survivors were wounded. The base, which had taken months to construct, no longer existed in any meaningful sense. Tang's account emphasizes the invisibility and suddenness of arc light. Unlike artillery, which announced itself with incoming screams, or tactical airstrikes, which involved visible aircraft and warning sounds, B-52 strikes arrived as instant cataclysm. The first indication of attack was the explosions themselves. This created unique terror, the knowledge that death could arrive at any moment without warning, that no vigilance could provide early warning, that survival depended entirely on not being in the target box when bombs fell. Soviet sources provide technical rather than emotional perspectives. Major General Georgy Zimin, who served as senior air defense advisor in North Vietnam from 1966 to 1968, later wrote about the challenges of countering B-52 operations. He acknowledged that American electronic warfare capabilities exceeded Soviet intelligence estimates, that the operational tempo sustained by Strategic Air Command proved difficult to counter with available resources, and that the B-52's altitude and radar cross-section characteristics made it a difficult target even under ideal engagement conditions. Zimin reported that Soviet technicians continuously updated tactics and equipment throughout the war, incorporating lessons learned from each engagement. He emphasized that the S-75 system, while effective against tactical aircraft, was not optimally designed for the high-altitude, heavily jammed environment that B-52s created. The missile's guidance system struggled to maintain track when multiple targets, real bombers plus electronic phantoms generated by jamming, appeared simultaneously. Battery commanders had to make split-second decisions about which targets were real, often expending missiles against false returns while actual bombers escaped. The Soviet advisor also noted logistical constraints. North Vietnam's limited industrial base meant that every S-75 missile, every radar component, and every technical specialist came from the Soviet Union via long supply lines through China. Sustaining operations required continuous resupply, but Soviet production capacity had limits. During intensive bombing periods like Linebacker 2, North Vietnamese air defenses fired missiles faster than Soviet industry could replace them. This attrition, Zimin acknowledged, ultimately degraded the system's effectiveness more than any tactical countermeasure. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Mikhailovich Polyansky, a Soviet radar officer who controlled S-75 batteries during Linebacker 2, provided one of the few detailed Soviet accounts of engaging B-52s. He described the December 20th, 1972 engagements as technically successful, but strategically futile. His radar tracked incoming bomber formations, calculated firing solutions, and directed coordinated salvos from multiple batteries. Several B-52s were destroyed. Polyansky personally claimed involvement in 3 shootdowns. Yet the bombers kept coming. Formations absorbed losses and continued to target. Survivors dropped their ordnance and departed. The next night brought more bombers. Polyansky wrote that the experience taught him that numerical superiority and sustained operations could overwhelm even effective defenses. Soviet doctrine assumed that inflicting unacceptable losses would force attackers to cease operations. The Americans demonstrated willingness to accept losses that Soviet planners considered prohibitive and continue operations until defenses collapsed from attrition. This lesson, Polyansky noted, influenced Soviet military thinking about potential NATO air campaigns against Warsaw Pact forces. Perhaps the most poignant testimony comes from Dang Thuy Tram, a North Vietnamese doctor whose diary was captured by American forces in 1970, held in private possession for decades, and finally published in Vietnam in 2005 as "Last Night I Dreamed of Peace." Tram worked in field hospitals and aid stations in Quang Ngai province, treating casualties from all causes, including arc light strikes. Her diary entries describe the medical challenges of treating arc light survivors. massive internal injuries from overpressure, traumatic amputations, psychological trauma requiring treatment she lacked training and resources to provide. One entry from March 1969 describes receiving casualties from an arc light strike that hit a battalion command post. 27 wounded arrived at her aid station, most critically injured. She wrote that the wounds differed from typical combat trauma. Less fragmentation damage, more crushing injuries, and internal hemorrhaging consistent with blast overpressure. Despite her efforts, 18 died within 24 hours. The survivors bore psychological scars beyond her capacity to address. She noted feeling helpless, possessing medical knowledge but lacking resources, watching young men die from injuries that modern hospitals might treat successfully. Tram herself died in June 1970, killed during an American operation, not by arc light but by ground combat. Her diary survived, providing rare insight into how North Vietnamese medical personnel experienced the war's violence. Her descriptions of arc light casualties confirm American assessments of the weapon's physical effects while adding human dimension that clinical reports omit. These voices, commanders, soldiers, advisors, doctors, collectively confirm arc light's tactical effectiveness while providing context that American sources cannot. They describe an enemy that endured bombardment through ideological commitment, tactical adaptation, and acceptance of casualties that most militaries would consider catastrophic. They acknowledge American technological superiority while explaining how that superiority proved insufficient to achieve strategic objectives. They humanize statistics, transforming abstract casualty figures into individual experiences of terror, suffering, and loss. Arc light represents one of the most comprehensive applications of air power in military history. Sustained, technologically sophisticated, logistically complex, tactically effective, and strategically insufficient. It embodied contradictions that define modern warfare. The capacity for industrial-scale destruction coexisting with inability to achieve political objectives. Overwhelming tactical dominance accompanied by strategic defeat. Technological superiority that could not overcome determined resistance. The campaign killed hundreds of thousands, most dying without seeing the weapon that destroyed them. It saved American lives by destroying enemy forces mirrors before they could engage friendly troops. It terrified opponents while failing to break their will. It demonstrated capabilities that influenced military doctrine for subsequent decades while contributing to a war ultimately lost. No final verdict reconciles these contradictions. Military historians emphasizing tactical analysis judge arc light successful. It achieved operational objectives, supported ground forces effectively, and inflicted disproportionate casualties with minimal friendly losses. Political historians emphasizing strategic outcomes judge it futile. It consumed vast resources without preventing eventual defeat, killed massively without achieving political objectives, and exemplified American over-reliance on technological solutions to fundamentally political problems. Both judgments contain truth. Arc light was simultaneously triumph and tragedy, demonstration of capability and evidence of limitation, tactical success and strategic failure. These contradictions coexist because warfare itself contains contradictions. Violence serves political purposes, yet violence alone rarely achieves political objectives. Military power enables options, yet power's application often produces unintended consequences. Tactical excellence matters, yet strategy determines outcomes. The air crews who flew arc light missions, the soldiers who directed strikes, the commanders who authorized operations, and the political leaders who maintained the campaign all acted within frameworks they believed justified. Defending allies, containing communism, demonstrating American resolve. Their tactical success was real, measured in enemy casualties, missions completed, and objectives achieved. That these tactical successes contributed to a strategically unsuccessful war does not invalidate individual accomplishment or collective effectiveness at the operational level. The North Vietnamese soldiers and commanders who endured arc light, the Soviet advisors who attempted to counter it, and the civilians who suffered its consequences also acted within frameworks they believed justified, achieving national reunification, resisting foreign intervention, supporting allied governments. Their strategic success was real, measured ultimately in political victory despite tactical defeats. That this strategic success cost hundreds of thousands of lives does not diminish the achievement by their standards or invalidate the causes for which they fought. Arc Light's legacy endures in multiple forms. Aircraft still flying that dropped bombs on Vietnam. Doctrine informing current operations developed from lessons learned over Southeast Asia. Veterans carrying memories of missions flown or bombardments endured. Landscapes still scarred by craters, unexploded ordnance still killing decades later, and historical debates still unresolved about what the campaign meant and whether it was justified. The B-52 Stratofortress, designed in the 1940s to deliver nuclear apocalypse, adapted to conventional tactical missions in the 1960s, and continues serving in the 2020s as testament to Arc Light's technical legacy. The aircraft that symbolized potential world-ending destruction became the tool of tactical bombardment, demonstrating flexibility that justified decades of continued service. Current B-52 crews fly aircraft their grandparents might have flown over Vietnam, maintaining continuity across generations. The mathematical legacy: 126,615 sorties, 2.7 million tons, hundreds of thousands killed, tactical dominance, strategic insufficiency, defines how military professionals understand airpower's capabilities and limitations. No subsequent campaign matched Arc Light's scale, though many employed principles developed there. The Persian Gulf War's air campaign, Afghanistan operations, and counter-ISIS strikes all reflect Arc Light's lessons about precision targeting, electronic warfare, and sustained operations. The human legacy lives in memories and scars, physical and psychological, carried by survivors on both sides. American veterans who flew Arc Light missions wrestle with moral questions about what they did, whether it mattered, whether the killing was justified. Vietnamese veterans who survived bombardment carry trauma from experiencing invisible death from invisible enemies. Soviet advisors who participated remember when their technology proved insufficient against American operational tempo and electronic warfare. The historical legacy remains contested because Arc Light embodied fundamental questions about warfare's nature and purpose in the modern age. Can technological superiority compensate for strategic ambiguity? Does tactical effectiveness matter when political objectives prove unachievable? At what point does the scale of destruction become morally problematic, regardless of military necessity? When does the cost exceed potential benefit? These questions have no definitive answers because they depend on values, perspectives, and judgments that vary across individuals, cultures, and historical moments. What remains beyond dispute is what happened. Arc Light struck with devastating effectiveness, killed on unprecedented scales, demonstrated industrial civilization's capacity for organized destruction, and proved insufficient to achieve the war's political objectives. The mathematics were conclusive. The meaning remains debated. Both truths persist, defining Arc Light's place in military history as simultaneously exemplar and cautionary tale. Exemplar of what modern military power can achieve tactically. Cautionary tale about what such power cannot achieve strategically. This was Arc Light. The transformation of strategic bombers into tactical weapons. the application of industrial-scale logistics to sustained combat operations, the demonstration of American military-industrial capacity at its zenith, and the revelation of that capacity's limits when confronting determined resistance supported by rival superpowers and sustained by political will that bombardment could not break. The campaign ended in 1973. The debates continue. The lessons remain relevant. The contradictions stay unreconciled. This is Arc Light's true legacy. Not resolution, but recognition that modern warfare contains complexities that defy simple judgments. That tactical excellence and strategic wisdom are different capabilities, and that overwhelming military power, however impressively demonstrated, provides no guarantee of achieving political objectives when the fundamental strategic framework proves unsustainable. The bombers still fly. The craters remain. The dead are still dead. The survivors still remember. History records what happened, but renders no final verdict, leaving each generation to assess Arc Light according to their own standards, values, and understanding of what military power can and cannot achieve in serving political purposes.